my devotion to God if I was told to do what all monotheists are told to do, and admire the man who said, yes, I'll gut my kid to show my love of God, I'd say, no, fuck you.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Snoop Dogg.
You're Joseph Stalin. You've taken over Russia. You've been educated in a seminary in Georgia, by the way. Up till 1917, for hundreds of years, hundreds of millions of Russians have been told that the head of the state is a god, that the Tsar is above power, ordinary secular power, that he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church as well as the... You shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you can't take advantage of a deep well of credulity and servility like that. It's your golden opportunity. What does he do? Heresy trials. Heresy trials, witch hunts, miraculous discoveries such as Lysenko's biology, the worship of the leader from whom all blessings flow. As I described North Korea, the most religious state I've ever seen. Mutatis mutandis, this would apply also to Mao's China, with the same background of superstition and servility. Now, for there to be a fair test about this, you'd have to do the following. And no one I've ever debated with has even tried it, so you be the first. You find me a state or a society that threw off theocracy and threw off religion and said we adopt the teachings of Lucretius and Democritus and Galileo and Spinoza and Darwin and Russell and Jefferson and Thomas Paine, and we make those what we teach our children. We make that scientific and rational humanism our teaching. And you find me that state that did that and fell into tyranny and slavery and famine and torture, and then we'll be on a level playing field. As it is, all you've done is show that the idea of worship and the idea of credulity and the idea of servility and slavery to religion is a bad idea in the first place.
But none of the czars and none of the Chinese kings...
If anyone thinks that there's a question, who's heard me, who thinks there's a question I answered poorly, or inadequately, or badly, or failed to answer at all, and would like to challenge me, I'd happily give them 5 minutes. But I have, so to say, shot my bolt otherwise. Is there anyone who would like to challenge me? Yes. Please.
If there is no God, why do you spend your whole life trying to convince people that there isn't? Why don't you just stay home?
Can you repeat that?
Was the question?
The question is, if there is no God, why spend your life and career trying to refute that? Why not just leave it alone and stay home? Fair enough.
Well, it isn't my whole career, for one thing. It's become a major preoccupation of my life, though, in the last 8 or 9 years, especially since September 11, 2001, to try and help generate an opposition to theocracy and its depredations internationally. That is now probably my main political preoccupation. To help people in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Israel, resist those who sincerely want to encompass the destruction of civilization and sincerely believe they have God on their side in wanting to do so. Maybe I will take a few minutes just to say something that I find repulsive about especially monotheistic messianic religion. With a large part of itself, it quite clearly wants us all to die. It wants this world to come to an end. You can tell the yearning for things to be over whenever you read any of its real texts or listen to any of its real, authentic spokesmen, not the sort of the pathetic apologists who sometimes masquerade for it. Those who talk, there was a famous spokesman for this in Virginia until recently, about the rapture, say that those of us who have chosen rightly will be gathered to the arms of Jesus, leaving all of the rest of you behind. If we're in a car, it's your lookout. That car won't have a driver anymore. If we're a pilot, that's your lookout. That plane will crash. We will be with Jesus, and the rest of you can go straight to hell. The eschatological element that is inseparable from Christianity. If you don't believe that there is to be an apocalypse. There is going to be an end, a separation of the sheep and the goats, a condemnation, a final one. Then you're not really a believer. And the contempt for the things of this world shows through all of them. It's well put in an old rhyme from an English exclusive brethren sect. It says that we are the pure and chosen few, and all the rest are damned. There's room enough in hell for you. We don't want heaven crammed. You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution. When you look at the Israeli settlers, paid for often by American tax dollars, deciding that if they can steal enough land from other people and get all the Jews into the promised land and all the non-Jews out of it, then finally the Jewish people will be worthy of the return of the Messiah. And there are Christians in this country who consider it their job to help this happen so that Armageddon can occur, so that the painful business of living as humans and studying civilization and trying to acquire learning and knowledge and health and medicine and to push back the front can all be scrapped, and the cult of death can take over. That, to me, is a hideous thing in eschatological terms, in end times terms, on its own. A hateful idea, a hateful practice, and a hateful theory, but very much to be opposed in our daily lives, where there are people who sincerely mean it, who want to ruin the good relations that could exist between different peoples, nations, races, countries, tribes, ethnicities, who openly say they love death more than we love life, and who are betting that with God on their side, they're right about that. So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity. Thank you.
You see, well, somebody laughs. You may think that those aeroplanes in this city on 9/11 came out of a clear blue sky. I believe they emerged out of a swamp of hatred created by us. I believe that I believe, please. I believe these Al-Qaeda chaps, these killers and sadists and nihilists and producers of indiscriminate explosions, wouldn't be this way if we weren't so mean to them. Now, it's true some of them, Mr. Zarqawi, their leader, of course, the bin Ladenist leader, was in Iraq before, and was well known to have been in Iraq under the rule of Saddam Hussein, and I can tell you that no one gets in and out of Iraq at that level without the President knowing. And it's also true that a group affiliated with him, the Ansar al-Islam, a fundamentalist group, thought that its main job was to kill the Kurdish leadership in northern Iraq, the elected leadership, which is a strange target, I think, for a holy war. And it's also true that some of them came to Iraq after we threw them out of Afghanistan. Well, that's easy then. Leave them in control of Afghanistan. Don't mess around with these people. Don't make them angry. Don't make them mean. It's your fault. Now, this is masochism, but it's being offered to you by sadists. Okay. I suppose we have to congratulate you on being absolutely 100% consistent in your support for unmentionable thugs and criminals. And I should thank him, by the way, for eliciting, or allowing me to elicit, or you, perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, to elicit from him what I feared, but didn't hope, but in other words, a full declaration of support for the campaign of sabotage and murder and beheading that has taken the lives of brave journalists, demolished the offices of the United Nations,
Are there no depths to which you will
demolished the
not
offices
sink?
of the United Nations and the
Are
Red
there
Cross
any
in
depths to
Baghdad,
which you will not sink?
shot down senior clerics outside their places of worship, and continues as a campaign of mayhem to this day.
Are there no
It will
depths
be-
to which you will not sink?
Mr. Galloway may have enough in his memory as a socialist, the name that he's begun to disgrace so gravely, so horribly.
Don't say, look, do yourself and your faith the honor of saying it's faith. Don't say it's science-based.
The argument
you
would
won't
be,
get away with it.
Look, the argument would be, Christopher, is that if the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then miracles are possible because the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The question is, have miracles occurred in the first century? That requires another debate whereby we have to look at the historical evidence and see. And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
Very good. Now, a sentence or two from David Hume on miracles would clear all this up.
You'll need to.
Okay.
It's fallen off. So.
That's one up. A sentence or two from David Hume would correct what you said. A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention,
You can't
not a
say
suspension.
of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all, but yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
Can we do more? Yes?
Mr. Hitchens, you are likely the world's most charming, roguish, and enlightened atheist, and I love you for that. But as a Sufi Muslim, I'm very ruffled by the title of your book. Of all the titles that you likely had at your disposal, did you have to settle for the literal negation of Allahu Akbar?
Yes. I thought so. Thank you for that question. Thank you. No, it's a very good question, and I'm glad. I wanted to come back to it. Why?
Yeah, as I've said, I think that all religions are wrong in the same way, in that they privilege faith over reason, but they're not all equally bad in the same way all the time. I mean, if I'd been writing in the 1930s, I would certainly have said that the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world because of its open alliance with fascism and anti-Semitism, which the damage from that our culture has never recovered from and never will. But at the moment, it's very clear to me that the most toxic form that religion takes is the Islamic form. The horrible idea of wanting to end up with Sharia, with a religion-governed state, a state of religious law, and that the best means of getting there is jihad, holy war, and that Muslims have a special right to feel aggrieved enough to demand this, I think is absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And
in its
entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
But you're saying the same about it.
Also, that God speaks. The Archangel Gabriel speaks only Arabic, it seems.
I just want to say, in retrospect, you were very civil, actually. I don't know what I was thinking.
Is this the same characterization of all religions?
Well, actually, no, because remember, Islam makes one special claim for itself. All religions claim to be revealed truth. They all are founded by divine revelation. But Islam rather dangerously says, ours is the last and final one. There can't be any more after this. This is God's last word. Now, that's straight away a temptation to violence and intolerance, and if you note, it's a temptation they seem quite willing to fall for.
Rabbi,
second, I had another motive. Another motive, which is this. If you remember Dick Gregory, the older comrades here will, great black comedian and civil rights activist, when he came to write his memoir, he called it nigger.
Right.
It upset a lot of people, including his old mum, who called him and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "Mama, every time you hear that word again, they're selling my book." So every Allahu Akbar reminds people that we're in a very serious struggle with a very depraved religion. And that help is available.
Friend, you give no quarter?
Look, he believes in the prophecy of Muhammad. I'm sorry to say, I think he's been, at best, conned. Yeah.
Our time is ticking down.
Atheism by itself is, of course, not a moral position or a political one of any kind. It simply is the refusal to believe in a supernatural dimension. For you to say of Nazism that it was the implementation of the work of Charles Darwin is a filthy slander, undeserving of you, and an insult to this audience. Darwin's thought was not taught in Germany. Darwinism was derided in Germany, along with every other form of unbelief. All the great modern atheist thinkers, Darwin, Einstein, and Freud, were alike despised by the National Socialist regime. Now, just to take the most notorious of the 20th century totalitarianisms, the most finished example, the most perfected one, the most ruthless and refined one, that of National Socialism, the one that fortunately allowed the escape of all these great atheist thinkers and many others to the United States, country of separation of church and state that gave them welcome. If it's an atheistic regime, then how come that in the first chapter of Mein Kampf, Hitler says he's doing God's work and executing God's will in destroying the Jewish people? How come the Führer oath that every officer of the party and the army had to take, making Hitler into a minor god, begins, "I swear in the name of Almighty God, my loyalty to the Führer"? How come that on the belt buckle of every Nazi soldier it says, "Gott mit uns," God on our side? How come that the first treaty made by the National Socialist dictatorship, the very first, is with the Vatican, exchanging political control of Germany for Catholic control of German education? How come that the churches celebrated the birthday of the Führer every day, every year, I mean, on that day, until democracy put an end to this filthy, quasi-religious, superstitious, barbarous, reactionary system? Again, this is not a difference of emphasis between us to suggest that there's something fascistic about me and my beliefs is something I won't hear said, and you shouldn't believe. Thank you. Supernatural claims must be true, or none of them are, my own position, or only one of them is. The least probable position of all. Right. The one you've decided to occupy.
You asked me.
No, I was asking how on what you've found. Your assertion that yours is the only true bill.
The ones I believe in, the ones I believe in are the ones I believe in.
Yes. For example, why are your miracles the true bill and the others are all copies of it?
Because they happened. And I believe that Joseph, when he found out that Mary, his betrothed, was pregnant, he followed David Hume's advice to the letter. And he didn't know what the most reasonable explanation was. And that sort of thing. It's not that in the ancient world, it's not that people didn't know where babies came from. It's
no, all Joseph knew was who hadn't made her pregnant.
Right.
If we have to be crude about this.
Correct.
And if you were David Hume, you would ask which is more likely, that the fact that he hasn't made her pregnant and she is the result of divine intervention, or that a Jewish girl could tell a fib.
Sure. And Joseph.
Now, of the two, I don't think the latter is overwhelmingly improbable. No religion has ever been founded except with the claim that its founder and prophet was born of a virgin. I have the whole list in the front of my book, if anyone. By the way, available at fine bookstores everywhere. I have in the first 2 pages of my book a list. There is no religion from Aztec to Hindu, including Buddhism, where the Gautama is born through a slit in his mother's side, where it doesn't begin with a miraculous birth.
And there's no counterfeit money.
You couldn't be in the religion business without claiming that, especially in the greater Jerusalem area.
Nobody counterfeits brown Safeway shopping bags. They're not worthwhile. It's not worth it to counterfeit them. If something's worthwhile, all right, you've got to.
Nobody bothers to counterfeit bad currency. Well, it turns out that they do.
But not currency believed to be.
It turns out that things, the ironies of history, and the cruelties that reality practice on us as a suffering species. Yes, actually, people will go to great lengths to say, I'd like to deal in this bankrupt currency. It can happen, and it has, as you've just shown. In other words, we don't particularly welcome the idea of the annihilation either of ourselves or of the entropic heat death of the universe. We don't like the idea, but there's a good deal of evidence to suggest that that is what's going to happen. And there's very, very little evidence to suggest that I'll see you all again in some theme park. There's absolutely no evidence for that at all, so I'm willing to accept, on the evidence, conclusions that may be unwelcome to me. I'm sorry if I sound as if I'm spelling that out. Probably about 180,000 years ago, an appalling global warming crisis occurred, and the estimate is that the number of humans in Africa went down to between 40 and 30,000. This close to joining every other species that had gone extinct. There's a certain arrogance to this assumption that all of this extraordinary development was all about us. The tremendous wastefulness of it, the tremendous cruelty of it, the tremendous caprice of it, the tremendous tinkering and incompetence of it, never mind, at least we're here. The whole universe was designed with just you in mind. There's no claim I know how to make that says atheism is true, because atheism is the statement that a certain proposition isn't true. So I wish you'd get this bit right. But I would say, yes, I think we have free will. When asked why I think so, I would have to take refuge in philosophical irony and say, because I don't think we have any choice but to have free will. But the Christian answer is, of course you have free will. The boss insists upon it.
Why is it that the Islamic country, Iran, is the threat to peace in the world and not the Zionist? Is it America's support of Israel? Well, hundreds of people are getting killed in Gaza and West Bank every day with the support of America. The Israel-Palestinian war has been going on for 61 years, and we are not actually looking at what is actually happening, and we're fearing about what is not happening. We're fearing about something that hasn't happened.
Mr. Hitchens? It's become a familiar thing. I should perhaps preface this by saying that with Edward Said, the late Professor Edward Said, I wrote a book about the rights of Palestinians and the way in which these have been negated by Israeli policy. But I know a lot of people in the Arab and Muslim world who are fed up with having the subject changed to Israel whenever human rights for them comes up. A very good example of this just last week in Tehran, where the government has an official Al-Quds Day, as it's called, the Day of Jerusalem, where school children and others are paraded. It's a more or less compulsory demonstration to say they'll give their blood and their lives for Palestine. And hundreds of thousands of Iranians turned up to say, no, we'll only give our blood for Iran, thanks. We're fed up with being told by the regime that they represent the oppressed of Palestine, that we can't talk. And they are having to shed their blood because the regime keeps on killing them for wanting to have a say in their own internal affairs. And a regime that does this and has just pulled off a blood-stained military coup that's overturned the results even of an already predeterminedly fraudulent election, that says that, that a woman's voice is worth that of only... sorry, it takes 3 women in a court against 1 man, that uses torture and rape as policies in prison and so forth. You want a regime like that to have nuclear weapons? You're welcome. But you should say that's what you don't mind. Are you going to say that? Are you going to say you've no objection? That the real problem is the Jewish state? Come on, be serious.
So the Jewish state doesn't have nuclear weapons? Is that what you're saying?
Well, now, I appeal again to the fair-mindedness and intelligence of the audience. Did I say that?
No, but...
Did I in any way imply it?
No, but...
No. Did I not begin with a throat clearing, which I'll amplify if you like, about my long record of work about this, my defense of the Israeli dissidents who published the news about Israel's illegal program and gone to jail for it. I can refer you to all that if you like. But my point was directed specifically to you. Yeah. I said, does this, in your mind, make the destruction of human rights in Islamic countries okay or not?
No.
Good.
Okay, no, let's hear from Walid.
Well, that's progress of a kind. You have contempt for thought if you think that. I'm sorry, I have to not stop trying to be funny here.
No, hang on a second. If you have contempt for thought, simply because you recognize that someone who bases everything on reason has faith in the reasoning process, what's wrong with saying that? Why can't you say, I have confidence in reason, I have faith in reason, I trust in the reasoning process? You won't say that because it will reveal that both our positions are faith positions. If you ask me why I believe in the Bible and I flip open the Bible and show you a verse, you say you're appealing to what you need to prove. If I ask you, why do you believe in reason, and give me a reason,
I'll tell you
then
what,
you open your book,
no,
you open the reason, and you give me a reason.
No, you're making a huge leap. I say that the Bible, like the Quran and like the Torah, is man-made, not God-made. It's a human-made literary accretion full of plagiarism, contradiction, fragmentation, and so on. It's like every other book ever written. And there's nothing divine about it, and the appeal to it saying, I can trump anything you say because here's God's word on the page, is a contemptible way of arguing.
I wrote a logic textbook. Does that make logic man-made?
Logic is man-made, yes. Yeah.
So there's no reason to follow it then?
No.
If I reject the Bible because it's man-made...
Logic is the attempt by humans to make sense. It isn't a divine endowment that we possess. Same with philosophy. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. We don't say it's the revelation by... You say what you have is revealed. Now, here's the way of clarifying the difference between us, somebody asked earlier. I don't claim to know more than I can. Everything I've said this evening, I've backed by assertions, evidence, argument. Douglas Wilson, who's just as modest and friendly and tender a chap as I am, says, yeah, but I have an advantage over Christopher, which is I know what God wants, and I know what he says in his book. I have access to higher authority. Now, what I want you, I'll ask him, but I don't care, I've asked him before. You have to ask him. How does he know that? And by what right does he claim to know the mind of God? And if you were a serious spiritual person, wouldn't you think it was a bit much that someone said they could come before you and tell you what God wanted? As long as they don't call it modesty, I don't mind. As long as they don't call it humility, I don't mind. But I don't like being told that my arguments aren't as good as his because he has divine information that's withheld from me. Has it exactly the wrong way around. You see, as I was beginning to say earlier, we didn't have time in the question period. I wouldn't say that atheism was morally inferior. I wouldn't concede that for a second. I don't want to make a claim for its superiority either, but there may be a slight edge here. We don't believe anything that could be called wishful. In other words, we don't particularly welcome the idea of the annihilation either of ourselves as individuals. The party will go on and will have left and we're not coming back. or of the entropic heat death of the universe. We don't like the idea, but there's a good deal of evidence to suggest that that is what's going to happen. And there's very, very little evidence to suggest that I'll see you all again in some theme park. One nice and one nasty experience. There's absolutely no evidence for that at all.
So if your wife is pregnant and you know it's not you, the only alternative is that it's the Holy Spirit.
That's a false...
David Hume deals with this quite well. He says, in the case of the laws of nature being suspended, you have to ask yourself, have they been suspended in my favor, or am I possibly under a misapprehension? I think it's Thomas Paine who asks, which is more likely, that the laws of nature are suspended or that a Jewish girl should tell a fib? We have to grow up out of this stuff, you know. All of this could be part of a plan. There is no way an atheist can prove it's not. But it's some plan, isn't it? With mass destruction, pitiless extermination, annihilation going on all the time, and all of this set in motion on a scale that's absolutely beyond our imagination, in order that the Pope can tell people not to jerk off.
Stupid.
Right. Look, you've had your hand up for a while. I'm going to take your question. Lady in the front there.
Look, my one question is basically, or my one comment, or passing comment, is that so many times you've brought up women in Islam. I'd just like to correct that I've read the Quran, and all Muslim scholars would agree with me that Islam gives women a lot of rights. We over and over give women in Islam through the Quran. I may not say it through individuals who preach the religion, but Islam through the Quran gives women a lot of rights, and I need that to be heard. I need that to everyone to understand and hear that. I mean, I am a young Muslim woman myself. I sit before you, I have a voice, and I can speak to you, and I can look you in the eye, and I do have my rights. And when I go to Iran, I'm actually Iranian as well, so when I go to Iran, I also have my rights. I need it to be heard that the Quran, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gives us our rights. People, individuals in countries, and people who represent our religion may not, and they may do the wrong thing to sort of stand in front and show us religion and preach us religion, but Islam does.
All right. We're going to take that as a comment, a very passionate one at that. Okay.
Well, no. No, we're not. No, we're not going to take it as a comment. I can see your face, I can see your hair, and I can see you sitting in an audience with young gentlemen. Don't you tell me you can do any of that in Iran.
I can, though.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you cannot.
I can. In Iran, in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where I have been, my hair would be out. My hair would be out because my veil would be little. My hair would be, it may be covered a little bit, but just like in the Bible, in the letter to the Corinthians, it says to cover your head, to be modest.
It's a shame she spoiled what could have been a perfectly good statement.
All right, okay, I'm sorry.
Modesty would be there. I mean, you've been talking about these cheap jokes throughout this whole conversation, but you're the only one making the cheap comments.
You insult your sisters in Tehran who are being beaten. Who are being
Astaghfirullah
beaten and raped every day when you say that they have their
I do not
rights in the
insult my
Islamic
Muslim
Republic.
sisters. I do not insult
It's an
my-
insult to the women of Iran.
I do not. Astaghfirullah.
The question is to Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people from 95 that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people.
Ha! Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so, as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
Muslim, I'm very ruffled by the title of your book. Of all the titles that you likely had at your disposal, did you have to settle for the literal negation of Allahu Akbar?
Yes.
I thought so. Thank you for that question. Thank you. No, it's a very good question. I'm glad. I wanted to come back to it. Why?
Yeah, as I've said, I think that all religions are wrong in the same way, in that they privilege faith over reason, but they're not all equally bad in the same way all the time. I mean, if I'd been writing in the 1930s, I would certainly have said that the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world because of its open alliance with fascism and anti-Semitism, which the damage from that our culture has never recovered from and never will. But at the moment, it's very clear to me that the most toxic form that religion takes is the Islamic form. The horrible idea of wanting to end up with Sharia, with a religion-governed state, a state of religious law, and that the best means of getting there is jihad, holy war, and that Muslims have a special right to feel aggrieved enough to demand this, I think is absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And
in its
entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
But you're saying the same about
also that God speaks. The Archangel Gabriel speaks only Arabic, it seems.
I just want to say, in retrospect, you were very civil, actually. I don't know what I was thinking.
Is this the same characterization of all religions?
Well, actually, no, because remember, Islam makes one special claim for itself. All religions claim to be revealed truth. They all are founded by divine revelation. But Islam rather dangerously says, ours is the last and final one. There can't be any more after this. This is God's last word. Now, that's straight away a temptation to violence and intolerance, and if you note, it's a temptation they seem quite willing to fall for.
Rabbi,
Second, I had another motive, which is this. If you remember Dick Gregory, the older comrades here will, great black comedian and civil rights activist, when he came to write his memoir, he called it nigger.
Right.
It upset a lot of people, including his old mum, who called him and said, why are you doing this? And he says, Mama, every time you hear that word again, they're selling my book. So every Allahu Akbar reminds people that we're in a very serious struggle with a very depraved religion. And that help is available.
Friend, you give no quarter?
Look, he believes in the prophecy of Muhammad. I'm sorry to say, I think he's been, at best, conned. Yeah.
Our time is ticking down.
I say that homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love, and it deserves our respect for that reason. That when my children were young, I'd have been proud to have Stephen as their babysitter, and I'd told them they were lucky. And if anyone came to my door as a babysitter wearing holy orders, I'd call first a cab and then the police. And it's your fault, sir and ma'am, it's your fault that that's true, and that everybody knows it's true. How you can live with it, I don't know.
None of this.
By the way, the Russian Orthodox Church always stayed with Stalin, always stayed with Stalin.
But they never killed 30% of their population.
Who didn't?
The Russians never killed 30% of the population before the communists took over, 20 or 30%. No czar ever did that. No Christian czar ever did any killing on anyone.
Well, no, excuse me, they started the First World War, they started the pogroms, they brought the protocols of the Elders of Zion that was imported by Tsarist secret policemen to National Socialist Christian gangsters in Europe. How much do you think the export of Russian Orthodox anti-Semitism cost us in point of lives and war? And have you ever counted up what happened to the wars, in the wars that Tsarism started and carried on, and the persecutions, and the famines, and the tortures, and the starvation, and the people who just died of neglect? Come on. You want to do this accounting, I'm here. I'm really here for you. Or what the Serbian Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox have just done in the Balkans. The most recent genocide we've seen in Europe, entirely done by Russian and Serbian Orthodox fascists and Catholic Croatian Ustasha, grinding a whole part of civilized Europe into nothingness and bloodshed for their filthy, stupid medieval quarrels. How dare you say that any secularist, we who've opposed this kind of barbaric stuff, are on all fours with these creeps? You should take it back. You owe me an apology.
lose, Boychik. You lose, Boychik.
Please. Hey, civility. Civility.
Civility is overrated. You've got to believe in everything I say, or go to hell, or heaven. Because, and here's why you've got to agree with me, because my mother never went to bed with anybody. And that proves the truth of what I say. Or by the way, I must have looked very dead when they took me down from the cross, but I didn't die. And that proves my point. I'm willing to grant it all. I'm willing to grant the Immaculate Conception first, then the virgin birth, then the resurrection, and the Annunciation and the Assumption. I'm willing to grant all of it. It doesn't prove the truth of the proposition that you should take no thought for the morrow. The central doctrine of Jesus of Nazareth, take no thought for the morrow. No investment, no thrift, no care for your children, that you should abandon your family, not worry about construction, about investment, about anything. Just follow me. A ridiculous and immoral proposition that, as C.S. Lewis so cleverly, and I must say for him, very honestly puts it, means that the man must either have been a maniac, a sick man, an evil man, or he must have believed that the world was coming immediately to an end, and that he was commanded to announce this fact to the deluded Bronze Age inhabitants of Palestine. Because if he didn't believe that, if he didn't believe he was divinely mandated, then his words would not have been inaccurate or false, they would have been wicked. That's what you have to be talking about. Now, there is, on the historicity point, there are only two reasons, I think, to suppose that there may have been the figure of some kind of deluded rabbi present at that time. The first is the fakery of the story. The fakery itself proves something. The prophecy says this man must be born in the house of David, of David's line in David's town. It means he must be born in Bethlehem. Jesus of Nazareth is well known to have been born in Nazareth. In order to get him to Bethlehem, a huge fabrication has to be undertaken. A census is proposed by Caesar Augustus. No such census ever took place. The people of the region were not required to go back to their hometown to be registered. That's never happened. Quirinius was not governor of Syria in that year, as the Gospels say. None of the story of the Nativity is true in any detail, and not one of the Gospels agrees with each other on this fabrication. But the fabrication itself suggests something. If they were simply going to make up the whole thing, and there'd never been any such person, then why not just have him born in Bethlehem right there, and leave out the Nazarene business? So the very falsity of it, the very fanatical attempt to make it come right, suggests that yes, there may have been a charismatic, deluded individual wandering around at that time. But which is most impressive to you? The fantastic fabrications, the unbelievably inane and inarticulate preachments, or the inconsistencies in the story? You could mention another thing about the resurrection. Most of the witnesses to this are women, illiterate, stupid, deluded, hysterical females, of the kind who in a Jewish court at that time would have had about as much chance of being listened to as they would in an Islamic court today. What religion that wants its fabrication to be believed is going to say, you've got to believe it, because we have some illiterate, hysterical girls who said they saw this? No, it's impressive to me. It's impressive to me that the evidence is so thin, and is so hysterical, and is so feeble, and is so obviously, strenuously cobbled together, because it suggests that something was going on. There was some character. And I don't want to, therefore, to profane those who think that no, there must have been something, and say, no, there was nothing. This is not a whole cloth fabrication, but it is a very human and very intelligible and very pitiable, I think, practice of fraud that may have worked on stupefied peasants in the Greater Jerusalem area, but should really have no power to influence anyone in this room, whereas the noble methods and words and systems by which Socrates reasoned will continue to illuminate our path for as long as we care about the only real gift we